If you're thinking of sharing a naked picture of yourself with someone, don't.
Snapchat is an app used by millions of people across the world, and because of that, there are a lot of scammers and other degenerates that use the platform. So today, we'll uncover a few of these stories. Our first story begins on the other side of the earth when a young man named Charlie Wade arrived in Perth, Australia, as part of a global backpacking trip. The 21-year-old Englishman was alone in an unfamiliar country, but he soon made a local connection when he met a woman online who went by the name Amelia. The two started talking actively on apps like Snapchat, with the attractive young woman gaining the young traveler's trust. As they learned more about each other, the potential sweetheart revealed that she was also from England and was studying close to Charlie's birthplace in Bath. The more they shared about their lives, the closer they grew. Their conversations soon turned intimate, and during one such exchange, Amelia suddenly asked Charlie to send a nude photo. He was surprised, but decided to throw caution to the wind and send the revealing pictures to her. But immediately after Amelia received the images, the Englishman quickly discovered that he was caught in a snafu. This is because she instantly sent messages back threatening to send the revealing pics to all of Charlie's Instagram followers. The only thing that would stop her was a €500 bribe. Charlie went through a whirlwind of emotions: shock, disappointment, and soon arrived at overwhelming fear. His instinctive reaction was to send the money to avoid the embarrassment, and he quickly attempted to do so. But fate intervened, and since the transaction was so large, it was rejected. This turned out to be lucky, as once the young man had time to clear his head, he realized that he wasn't as trapped as he thought. You see, Charlie hadn't shown his face in any of the illicit photos, so he decided to call Amelia or whoever was behind the fake profile on their bluff. Charlie blocked the account on all forms of social media, which they had shared over the course of their budding friendship. In the end, the scammer did end up sending the photos to a few of his acquaintances, who he quickly messaged to explain the situation. Rather than let this negative experience derail his trip, Charlie continued to travel around Australia, and started to share his story more openly as he got further away from it. He met several other young men who had gone through the same experience, and found out that other con artists would sometimes send the intimate photos out to the victim's family and friends, even if they paid. Some of these men had shelled out triple the amount that had been demanded of Charlie, but couldn't escape the threat of embarrassment that was dangled over them. Charlie shared that in the wake of his experience, he had completely stopped talking to new people online. Given how convincing a fake profile can be, it makes sense that the victims of such scams would want to keep their interactions rooted in real life afterwards. And sometimes the target of these scams are not as lucky as Charlie, and the fear, pressure, and stress can prove to be too much to handle. The tragic results can be found in cases like that of Ryan Last, a 17-year-old from San Jose, California. In May of 2022, just a few days after visiting some colleges that he was considering, the teen received a message from someone who he believed to be a girl around his age. The conversation quickly grew intimate, as the mysterious girl sent Ryan a nude photo and asked for one in return. Immediately after he sent the photo, the boy received a familiar demand for money in exchange for the images not being sent to his parents. The scammer was demanding $5,000, which Last was unable to pay. After some shrewd haggling, it was lowered to just $150, which the terrified teenager paid for out of his college savings. But even after sending the cash, the scammers kept demanding more and more, upping the pressure on Ryan until it overwhelmed him, and he only saw one way out. This tragedy unfolded over just a few hours. The boy's mother, Pauline, later shared that she had said goodnight to her son at 10 p.m., and by 2 a.m. the scam had come to a horrifying end. The teenager left a note behind, describing how embarrassed he was for himself and his family. Having been subjected to a level of stress that no one should have to endure, Ryan felt that he couldn't face any outcome of the situation. After writing his final message, the young man took his own life. It would take months for a culprit to be found, but eventually the internet footprints would be traced. In late December of the same year, a 25-year-old named Jonathan Cassie was arrested in connection to a West African financial extortion scheme that appeared to have targeted the late teenager, with a long prison sentence sure to ensue. This was just one of many sextortion cases plaguing the US. The FBI reported over 18,000 related complaints in 2021, with losses in excess of $13 million. Many of these complaints came from scammers who targeted children specifically, sharing and creating a seemingly bottomless well of illegal material to exploit their trust. But one of the main challenges facing the investigations of these crimes is that so many go unreported, with the victims choosing to endure the fear and shame in silence. The more drastic responses to being scammed, like what happened to Ryan Last, is more common in teenagers because of their still developing brains. According to specialist Dr. Scott Hadlad, it can be difficult for the young victims of an extortion scam to see past the threat, to a point where the release of a nude photo would not have permanent ramifications on their social and personal lives. Hadlad stated that the best way for parents to help their children avoid the scams was to warn them without shame. When a young person is caught in what feels like a life-ruining moment, they need to know that they can talk to someone without facing further shame and justice. The more awareness that these scams get, the less power they can hold over the vulnerable people they target. But this is only the first of many Snapchat stories that we'll be discussing today. The rest will be shared after a brief word from our sponsor. Have you been in an automobile wreck or have been done wrong by a big company? Well, you might have the right to collect some compensation. And this is where Morgan & Morgan comes into play, America's largest injury law firm with over 800 attorneys operating in 49 states. I know it might seem daunting to try to find a lawyer, but with their website, you can submit your case with only 8 clicks, with no obligations. You can submit your case details, sign contracts, upload documents, and medical records all from your cell phone. They really have modernized the industry. On top of that, their fee is free. You only pay them if they take on your case and win you money. No upfront costs, no sign-up fees, no nothing. Because of this, over 3 million people call Morgan & Morgan each and every year. And for those people, they've recovered over $15 billion in compensation. So even if you slightly think you might have a case, I highly encourage you to click the link in the description down below or the one written on the screen. Or you can also call them. That's forthepeople.com/GFM or #529, otherwise known as Pound Law. While many criminals have stayed safe behind the anonymity of social media platforms like Snapchat due to the ability to have messages vanish after being sent, that very same anonymity can also be their downfall. In the case of Enroy Ruddock, a 19-year-old from the Coventry region of England, the openness with which people are willing to share their lives online proved to lead directly to prison. Ruddock was part of a gang of youths in Canley who were embroiled in a feud with a rival gang from Tile Hill, a neighboring city, including Emmanuel Lukenga, a 21-year-old who would soon become the center of a violent collision between the groups. The Canley youth struck first, setting fire to Lukenga's car after tracking it down on a stolen motorbike, along with a van filled with gas cans. Just minutes after the arson, the crew spotted 2 of Emmanuel's friends, who ran into a local convenience store as soon as they were seen. CCTV footage from the shop shows Ruddock and his associate, Bradley Richardson, approaching the store with weapons in hand. Richardson carried a large axe, and Ruddock seemed to be hiding something behind his back. But they decided not to attack their rivals in such a public place, returned to their van, and sped off, continuing the hunt for Lukenga. Eventually, the Canley youths found him and some of his friends walking down a street, and began to chase them in their vehicles. Lukenga's group tried to escape down an alleyway, but their vehicle stayed in pursuit, sustaining some damage as it forced its way through the tight space. The vehicle soon came to a stop, with Ruddock and Richardson emerging to continue the chase, armed and on foot. Lukenga and his friends ran through a nearby garden, with local residents watching in terror as the pursuit continued. To clear a path, Richardson axed down a gate, which allowed Ruddock to catch up with Lukenga as he tried to climb a fence. Ruddock brandished a huge knife and stabbed his enemy, leaving him on the ground and running off into the night. The police were quickly called to the scene, and although they and the paramedics tried to save the young man, the stab wound had severed a vital artery, and he died before he could be transported to a hospital. Later that same day, Ruddock shared a video on Snapchat. In it, his face was covered by an emoji, and he openly bragged about stabbing the dead teenager, sounding proud of the murder. The police were already on his gang's trail and were tracking their movements back to hours earlier through security camera footage. Detective Chief Inspector Scott Griffiths later shared that they were able to find the killer by linking him to his associate Kyle Kinchin, who had given Ruddock a motorcycle helmet on the day of the murder that could be seen in the footage. The killer's Snapchat post was the clincher. His blatant admission of guilt without any sign of remorse sealed his fate. Through witness statements and further detective work, the police eventually found the stolen motorcycle, some empty gas cans, and clothing that had been burned together, as well as an abandoned knife near the scene of the crime that matched the damage to Lukanga's clothing. From there, it was short work to locate the other men who had been with the killers that night, Matthew Brankin and Riley Madden. Kinchin and Madden were the only ones who were not convicted of arson and murder after a 6-week trial. The rest of the youths were sentenced to life in prison. Madden was only booked for handling stolen goods, and Kinchin was found not guilty. The violence that night sent ripples through the community, and the chilling video that Ruddock posted became a point of focus in the media. The fact that he was so willing to publicly share his crimes was unsettling to many. And this event remains a notable example of how Snapchat can be weaponized against a criminal just as easily as against a victim. One of Snapchat's most famous features is its tracking system, which can let users see the locations of their friends and family around the world as they share photos. But as with any service that publicly displays a person's real-time location, it's also very easy to abuse. Such was the case in Boynton Beach, Florida in January 2017, when the feature was used to plan and execute a violent home invasion, as well as to turn the tables on its perpetrators. Eric Crawford, a 20-year-old resident of the city, had been receiving threatening texts from a teenager named Connor Kilpatrick, with whom he had a pre-existing beef with over Snapchat. Eric tried his best to shrug off the messages, but the 17-year-old foe delivered on his promises early into the new year. Kilpatrick and 2 friends forced their way into Crawford's home one day, attacking him brutally. They doused him in pepper spray, beat him with a large stick, and threatened him with a knife while they ransacked his home. The teen stole alcohol, marijuana, and gold jewelry before escaping, but their getaway was not as clean as they hoped. Crawford had recognized Kilpatrick right away, and although he called the police in the aftermath of the incident, he also began his own investigation. In the following days, Crawford tracked Kilpatrick's moves on Snapchat, waiting for him to show any evidence of his crime. Eventually, he got his wish when the thief posted a photo of himself with some of the stolen jewelry inside a Maserati. The picture had the caption, "Stolo Lolo," which was as close to a confession as Crawford could get from a distance. He took a screenshot and shared it with the officers working his case, who soon discovered that the sports car in Kilpatrick's photo was stolen as well. From there, the police were able to track the vehicle to a Kmart in Boca Raton, where they found the 3 teenage suspects inside when they arrived. The teens tried to talk their way out of the situation, blaming the stolen car on another one of their friends, but they were still arrested. They were all later released on a $25,000 bond, with Kilpatrick's containing the condition of house arrest. This story proves that while snaps may disappear after they are seen, sometimes they can stick around long enough to do lasting damage. In June of 2022, when realtor Chloe Kroll met a man on Snapchat, their conversation began casually, but one day he made a surprising request. He asked if Chloe could send him $1,000, which he claimed he would be able to flip into a much larger amount. Although she later admitted that she found the request sketchy, Chloe agreed to send just $100 to start, warning her new friend that she would come find him if he tried to pull anything. Her suspicions were soon confirmed. Immediately after the man received the money, he blocked Chloe on all of social media and disappeared. But rather than sit with the loss, the woman decided to follow through on her warning and began to do a deep dive into social media to track down whoever was behind the account that had scammed her. Her search lasted deep into the night, and she eventually came across people who knew the criminal. All of them backed him up and tried to push Chloe off his trail, but she continued to dig. Eventually, she was able to track down a person who knew her scammer's surname, which led her to his extended family's online profiles. Searching through these mysterious relatives, she was soon able to get her hands on addresses and a phone number, which she used to reach out to a still unnamed relative of her scammer. This person, who kept her connection to the man private, told Chloe that their mutual contact had been stealing from everyone, including family, and that she had received messages about this behavior before. Chloe shared her plan to confront the man and retrieve her money, and his relative told her exactly where he would be. The real estate agent went directly to the scammer's front door. But when she knocked, his mother was the one who answered. As soon as Chloe introduced herself and explained the situation, the older woman started to scream for her son, who came to the front door and was shocked to find his victim standing there. The women started to berate the young man together and were soon joined by his grandmother. Once the cacophony of anger died down, the scammer and his former victim came to an agreement. He would send the money back to her over Cash App within the next 3 hours. She left the house and later received her money, along with an apologetic text message the next day. Chloe later shared her story with the world through TikTok, accumulating over 278,000 views and leaving many viewers impressed by her amateur detective work. Her story gave many people a platform to discuss their own similar experiences, and some commenters even asked if Chloe could help them recover the money they had lost. Although she never took any of them up on their offers, her story remains a strong example that scammers can sometimes bend as easily as their victims when they're pushed on the same personal level. Among all of the stories about Snapchat discussed today, perhaps the strangest one is what happened to the app's founder. Reggie Brown came up with the initial idea for the platform while smoking weed with his fellow Stanford University undergraduates, speculating that programming images to disappear after they were received would make sexting even easier. He shared the idea with his friend Evan Spiegel, who also saw great potential in the concept. The two students soon brought Bobby Murphy, another classmate, on board to write the app's initial code. In the summer of 2011, the trio moved to Spiegel's father's home in Los Angeles to work on the project full-time, but tensions were already rising. While the three friends had been drawn together through college parties, Reggie was far more persistent in his debauchery, and his co-founders became concerned that his focus was shifting away from his work. Arguments began to break out more often among them, escalating to the point where Spiegel and Murphy eventually locked their partner out of Snapchat's accounts just months after the startup had launched. Despite this setback, with the person who came up with the concept, the app quickly took off and became a well-known social network. But in 2013, Brown sued Spiegel and Murphy, claiming that he rightfully owned 20% of the company. As the legal battle unfolded, it became clear that the relationship between the founders had degraded beyond repair. In his deposition for the lawsuit, which was leaked to Business Insider, Spiegel said that he regretted inviting Brown into his house, and also the many chances that he had given his former business partner while they were trying to get Snapchat off the ground. In the end, the two dedicated founders felt that they were being scammed out of their hard-earned money by a person who did none of the hard work. Still, they did concede that Brown deserved some compensation for his contributions to the original idea. And in September of 2014, the company agreed to pay the ousted founder $157.5 million in a cash settlement. This deal included a gag order that banned Brown from even speaking publicly about the company, and later that month, Snapchat released a statement that acknowledged him as the one who had originally come up with the idea for the app's general functionality. However, this statement was buried in the tech news landscape, perhaps intentionally, as it was published immediately before Apple's iPhone 6 and Apple Watch launch event. After settling with Snapchat, Reggie Brown faded out of public view. But a few years later, with his newfound wealth, he would make headlines again after several run-ins with the police. The first of these incidents occurred in December of 2020, in the South Carolina gated community called Kings Grant, where the young man had been living for a couple of years. On December 10th, a security guard told local police that the former tech player had crashed a black Rolls-Royce SUV into the subdivision security gate. The officers who responded to the report left without speaking to Brown, but they would be back the very next day. Police returned to Kings Grant after one of Brown's neighbors complained about him allegedly driving another car recklessly through the private streets. He was also seemingly shooting a very noisy music video with his friends at the nearby community center, taking advantage of the building's pool, playground, and clubhouse. When an officer arrived at the scene, he found Reggie sitting in a Bentley outside the establishment, and he refused to roll down his windows after being asked. The officer reported that the young man had a, quote, glassed over look on his face and dilated pupils. A man who was participating in the video shoot then approached the officer, trying to explain the situation. At this point, more locals began to approach the scene, including Brown's mother and the neighbor who had originally called the police. When he saw this neighbor, Reggie stepped out of his car and aggressively lunged at him, leading the officer to step between the men in order to keep them apart. According to his report, Brown allegedly swatted the cop's arms away, which prompted the officer to handcuff him. As this was unfolding, Reggie's father and more neighbors started to arrive on the scene, which continued to escalate to the point where the officers called for additional units to maintain control of the situation. When everyone got calmed down, Brown was asked to perform a field sobriety test, which he passed. The young man was handcuffed and released, with the crowd around him dispersing. It would be almost a year before his name was back in the news. In November 2021, police showed up at the door of Reggie's mansion in response to a new complaint from his neighbors. They claimed that the young man had been waging a long harassment crusade against them, which began when he damaged their lawn by driving his vehicle through it. He was also accused of shining his vehicle's headlights into their windows and setting off his car alarm in the middle of the night, seemingly just to aggravate everyone in the vicinity, along with multiple alleged instances of Brown loudly making remarks about his neighbors outside their house to his family and friends. When he was informed of these accusations, Reggie denied them all. He responded to the officer with some allegations of his own, claiming that his neighbors had poured gasoline and oil onto his property's palm trees, which killed them. He told the policeman that he had video footage of these acts on his phone, but also refused to show them. According to the officer's report, the Snapchat co-founder allegedly added that his neighbor's actions could be considered domestic terrorism, and he was considering getting the FBI involved. The questioning ended when the officer informed Brown that the neighbors had asked him to stop contacting them, since the escalating aggression in his behavior had left them afraid for their well-being. The very same day, these accusers were proven right. Minutes after the first officer had left, Reggie reportedly walked onto his neighbor's property and started up the harassment yet again, yelling profanities and, quote, derogatory terms at him and his grandchildren, even grabbing his crotch in their direction. The verbal assault continued until the officer returned, where he found Brown yelling at his neighbors from the back window of his house. He tried to speak with the antagonist, but he reportedly refused to come to the door. 4 days later, 7 police officers arrived back at Brown's house with a warrant for his arrest for first-degree harassment. Once again, nobody answered the door, so the police went to the home of his parents, who lived nearby. Reggie's brother answered the door and allegedly told the officers that he had left South Carolina. His father arrived soon after and explained that Reggie had been dropped off at a mental health rehabilitation center outside of the state to hopefully combat his unstable behavior. In the wake of this, the neighbors dropped the charges against Mr. Brown, and he has stayed out of the public eye ever since. It is unlikely that we'll ever hear more from Brown in the tech world again, as he has already effectively disappeared from it when Snapchat went public in 2017. As for the legal world, that remains to be seen. Reggie sold his house in January 2022 for just over $1 million, and his current whereabouts are unknown. Snapchat's other founders are now worth over $2 billion each, multiple times more than what they were shaken down for, and have kept the social media platform firmly in the mainstream. That success is not directly connected to Reggie Brown's early ousting from the company, but if he had stayed on board, the app may have not been able to reach the same heights. And there you have a few of the most dysfunctional stories to come out of the Snapchat app. And if there's any moral to be had here, it's that you should be very careful before using a platform to talk with people you don't know very well. And with that thought, I think I'll end the video here. So until next time, thanks for watching.